So we're just gonna continue our conversation from Tuesday. We gotta finish up anxiety. I want to talk about like the underlying origins, understanding where anxiety comes from, that sort of thing, and then we'll jump into depressive disorders, and we'll probably finish up by introducing psychotic disorders. And if you, after this, if you're like, oh man, I want to know more about all of these things, then you'll want to take Psych 314W with Dr. Kaiser, Abnormal Psych, because that's the class where you learn, where you go into detail about all of these things, and spend lots of time on other disorders that I don't get to because I don't have the time to in a 101 class. So if you want to know more about these things, that's definitely where you want to go. Okay. All right. So let's see if we can understand some of these disorders, shall we? Starting with anxiety. Yeah. So. There we go. So the first thing I want to share with you about anxiety, so you have to remember what we talked about on Tuesday. We went through generalized anxiety disorder. We went through OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, PTSD, panic disorder, phobias. Okay, so understand they're all classified as anxiety disorders, and one of the ways that we can understand anxiety disorders is through the process of conditioning. Okay, so it helps us understand where the fear generalization, the fear response, or the sympathetic nervous system response comes from. A panic or fear-inducing event will lead to a learning principle that is called stimulus generalization. So not only do you fear that thing, but then you fear things associated with it, things that are generalizable to the initial thing that made you fearful or panic or things like that. So, and then this leads to reinforcement. What happened?
I'm cleaning up to expand off the floor because he's cut my hand and all he's throwing fucking tantrums. So, that's great. Happy birthday.
Yep.
Because he wants to do the Lego now. And I spent this afternoon weekend because that's when Mummy and Daddy aren't working. We can hang out with you.
Yeah. Great birthday. Anyways, reinforcement generally keeps that generalization solid. It keeps it going, okay? It helps to maintain the panic and the fear that each of them get introduced by. Ellie just came by and then she just left. Cognitions that are associated with anxiety tend to be things like our thoughts, obviously, our memories of past events, our interpretations of those events, and then as our expectations of those events. Okay? And one of the cognitions, before I talk about biology, one of the cognitions that seems to be a feature among anxiety sufferers is hypervigilance. That is, constantly looking for the things that cause the anxiety. Because that expectation basically frames our reactions. It frames and shapes our reactions. Biology. So, we talked about GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. We talked about OCD, and we talked about PTSD. There seems to be a genetic predisposition, genes, obviously, genetic predisposition for those. But here's the sticky point. Researchers have identified 17 gene variations associated with these typical anxiety disorders. So it's nowhere near as simple as, oh, you have an allele, you don't have an allele. Okay, you have depression or anxiety, you don't have anxiety, right? So 17 gene variations. And one of the more crucial treatment options for anxiety sufferers is to regulate their serotonin, and gene production. Genes influence the production of serotonin. Okay, and whether or not you have enough of it. Okay, so genes do play a role. Epigenetics also seemingly may play a role too. So the experiences of your ancestors and the environments that they lived and the experiences they had may also turn gene expression on or off, which then may result in anxiety suffering by offspring and descendants, right? Too fast. The brain also plays a role, okay? One of the brain areas that I've talked about extensively recently has been the anterior cingulate cortex, which is your conflict detection area. And when that is ringing, it's basically telling your entire brain, like, there's a problem, right? We could also talk about the amygdala. Okay, the amygdala is responsible for a lot of our fear response. Okay, so an overactive amygdala, not a good thing. Okay, overactive amygdala. And then, of course, we could take a evolutionary approach to explain anxiety by saying that these systems, where anxiety comes from, is not necessarily a bad thing. These systems work to keep us alive, right? And so avoiding fearful things that could potentially kill us is important. They're easily conditioned, as I've mentioned previously, and they're difficult to extinguish because they keep us alive. But for our ancestors, for like way back, right? They were dealing with a lot of life and death situations. You can argue not so much in our modern world, right? But you could apply this idea of a predisposition to fear heights and confinement that might lead to something like fear of flying in an airplane. Okay? Phobias could be what, we're afraid or we're phobic of the things that are dangers that our ancestors faced significantly, okay? And so we want to do things to avoid them, and so they get expressed as phobias, that sort of thing. The idea here is not to say that anxiety is just a product of our evolution. No, anxiety disorders are a product of our evolution, plus that product being not for this world, not suitable for a modern environment, and so it leads to an overactive system. Okay, and so that's what anxiety disorders are. They're just an overactive biological system that gets passed on through genes. Okay. Let me know if you have any questions about anxiety disorders. Drop them in chat and I'll come back to them. Otherwise, we are moving on. I don't remember what this one is. Ah, yes, Brave. I like it. I'm not going to play it. But I really do enjoy this Sarah Bareilles song. Yeah, it's a guilty pleasure. So what? Big Whoop, want to fight about it? I like it because randos start dancing in public, and it's really fun. And it's a good message to anyone who might be suffering from depression, which is what we're going to talk about now. Sorry to be a downer today, but that's where we're going. Okay, so let me know if you've heard this myth before. You can snap out of depression, and snap out of it. Hey, snap out of it. Okay, thanks, Ben. I appreciate that. I'm not entirely sure what the issue would be, probably just on their end. I think I'm doing okay. Appreciate that, though, Ben. Appreciate that, though. Just got in, eh? Okay. So a couple of people have heard it. Alright. Men, can you let me know who you're hearing from? You can either email me or tell them to email me, or you can send it in chat. It doesn't really matter. So here's the thing. It says myth 3. It's obviously a myth, right? You can't snap out of depression. That's not how this works. That's not how this works. Come on now. And if you or someone you know has been struggling or has struggled with depression, you kind of wish you could snap out of it, but really, that's not happening. Okay? It's not happening. It takes a lot. It takes a lot. And that is because one of the features of depression is a negative feedback loop with your cognitions, which I'll share with you. The vicious cycle of depression, as I call it. But let's define it. So the one that most people talk about when they talk about depression is major depressive disorder. That's the DSM name for it. And it's under the classification of depressive disorders. And it's primarily, I talk about this one and bipolar disorder. I talk about this one and bipolar disorder because those are the two most common ones. But then there are other ones. So there's dysthymia, which is similar to major depressive disorder, but maybe a little less. So if you aren't experiencing the full weight of major depressive disorder, you may be having dysthymia. There's also cyclothymia, which is a cyclical major depressive disorder, but it's separated from bipolar disorder, as I'll discuss in a second. It's separated from bipolar disorder because there are no periods of mania. So it's just even depressed, and the cycles are predictable and repeatable. And then there are various other less common depressive disorders, but it is a large classification. I wish I knew where my DSM was, because I would just go into it. I don't have a DSM-5, as I mentioned, but I have a DSM-4TR. They didn't really change too much with depression, I do not believe, but be that as it may. So let's first focus on major depressive disorder. So in chat, if you let me know if you or someone you know has or is currently dealing with depression. I kind of want to get a sense of where you're all at. Now, you don't need to identify that it's you or someone you know. Just, something that indicates to me that you are aware of it somehow. That you are aware of it somehow. Let me know in chat. Aware, yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah, fully aware, yeah. Know someone who's currently dealing with it. Okay. Yeah. It's a lot of talk about it these days, obviously, because one of the more commonly discussed personality traits is extroversion versus introversion. Okay, and one of the ideas surrounding the definitions for those is that extroverts get their energy here used loosely from being around people, and introverts get their energy from being alone, not being around people. And it's a dimension. It's a continuum. So you could be anywhere on that continuum of fully extroverted to fully introverted. Although what those mean is hard to say. But right now people are in isolation, right? We're quarantining. We are trying to flatten the curve and try to get this whole coronavirus COVID-19 thing behind us, and eventually we will, because them viruses, they aren't too smart, and eventually we will crush it like a tiny little microscopic organism can be crushed. Okay, so we'll eventually get there, but right now we all have to sort of stick it out on our own. And that's a struggle for people, right? That's a struggle for people. And we are obviously in this time period of 2 or more weeks that you can see as part of the criteria for a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, right? A diagnosis of major depressive disorder. I really wish this would stop being annoying. There we go. So lots of people who are considered extroverted are not dealing with the isolation so much. Okay? They're not dealing well with it because they're like, well, I can't be social. This is really tough. I need to be around people. And so you end up getting to what major depressive disorder would start looking like. So how it is classified in the DSM-V for a diagnosis of major depressive disorder, and that you can refer to it as depression. You can refer to any of them as depression. Most people don't refer to bipolar as depression, but it is a major depressive disorder. But this one is what people are talking about when they're talking about depression. Okay, so we have 2 or more weeks, so there is a time limit. And please ask questions again, like Tuesday. Ask questions. I know you have them. I know you want to know some things that I don't say, so ask the questions. Just throw them in chat, and we'll talk about them. So and you can be as personal or impersonal as you want. but I think it's useful that we talk about that stuff while we're, together like this, as opposed to other situations, right? In case you can't get to the doctor or talk to a therapist or something. So, we have 2 or more weeks. That's the first thing. It's a time-based diagnosis. Time-based diagnosis. 2 or more weeks with 5 or more of symptoms, and I'm going to show the rest of the symptoms in just a second. At least one of which must be... So these are the 2 main symptoms of major depressive disorder. So 2 or more weeks of depressed mood or loss of interest or pleasure. And then you can add to that sentence loss of interest or pleasure in things that were once interesting or pleasurable, right? So loss of interest or pleasure is, generally speaking, a broad thing, and so you can say that you can add to that if you want. So you need to have at least one or of these. Okay, you can have both. And so those 2 are so this is the DSM-V classification. So the first 2 are right here. Okay, so these 2. Okay, and then 4 so one of these 2, and then 4, so if you have both of these, then 3 more of these. But if you have one of these, then you can have 4 of these, right? You can have more too. You can have all 9 of them. You can have all 9 symptoms for 2 or more weeks. That's why it's called major depressive disorder. Major. Woof. Major. Okay. So depressed mood most of the time. Okay. Dramatically reduced interest or enjoyment in most activities most of the time. So that's what I mean by loss of interest or pleasure. Significant challenges regulating appetite and weight. Significant challenges regulating sleep, either sleeping too little or sleeping too much. Physical agitation or lethargy. Okay. Feeling listless or with much less energy. Feeling worthless or feeling unwarranted guilt. Excuse me. So feeling worthless or feeling unwarranted guilt. Problems in thinking, concentrating, or making decisions. And then finally, the last one, which is pretty crucial for any interventionist to know, especially if you are have severe issues here, thinking repetitively of death and suicide. So that would be a crisis bit of information. So whether you need to be admitted to the hospital for a mandatory 72-hour hold to protect you from self-harming. Yeah, so that's the really gnarly one. That's the one that's going to instigate processes to keep you safe. Okay. So that's major depressive disorder. Questions about this? The questions about this one. Ask away. Ask away. I don't know a lot about depressive disorders, but I do know enough to help you all. Any questions? Nothing? How do we feel about our understanding of depression? I know you said you were all aware of it, or know someone, or possibly you are. But how do we feel about our understanding of it? Does it make sense? Elena, that's a good question. Is it true that it can be genetically passed down? Well, as we'll discuss in a little bit, there are genetic predispositions to depression. So, if your parents or grandparents have suffered major depressive disorder in their lives, then yes, their children are more likely to suffer from depressive episodes as well. Yeah, it's a good question. It's not as heritable as some other things, though. So, as we'll talk about with, like, say, schizophrenia, for example, not as heritable as schizophrenia, but still heritable. Yeah. Other questions about depression? Especially this last one here, thinking repetitively of death and suicide. It's one to have my mouse sit on my shoulder. Hey mouse, what's up, dog? Hey buddy. Oh no, you went away. Oh my goodness. Oh. Can it be caused by... I imagine that... Can it be caused by something you were gonna add? Can it be caused? Yeah, sure can. That's a good question, Meredith. Does it ever really go away, or you just learn how to maintain it? It depends on what kind of depression it is. This is a very good question. It depends on what kind of depression it is. So if we're talking about major depressive disorder, sometimes it does go away. Sometimes it does go away on its own. But I will say that it's likely a chronic condition, which will just need maintenance treatment. So whether that treatment involves talk therapy or medication or both, depending on the severity of the depression. Yeah, so it I would say it depends. It depends on the severity of the depression. It depends on what treatment you do, what treatment, like initial treatment that you do. So whether it's therapy, medication, both, etc. Mild depression episodes can go away on their own. They can go on their way, away on their own. But if there is a genetic component to it, as I just mentioned, and it's severe, then it may be something that's chronic. Yeah. Christine, can it be caused by major trauma, or is it only genetic? Oh yeah, it can totally be created out of caused by a major trauma. Yeah, it's not only no. I don't want it to sound like depression is only genetic. It's actually, like I said, it's less heritable than some other psychological disorders, like schizophrenia that we were going to ask about. So no, it can definitely be caused by environmental things and other tragic. I'll have an understanding slide up here in just a moment, but it's good. Good thing. So Yeah, definitely major trauma for sure. Biopsychosocial approach is what I'd say. Yeah. Golden Duke's asking, other than serotonin or the other neurotransmitters that can cause depressive disorder, I believe dopamine's been somewhat implicated, but not a lot. And the reason, and I'm sure other neurotransmitters do play a role, but as far as the biological model of depression is concerned, it's mostly serotonin, and that's because serotonin is a mood regulator. And so the first thing that, again, so as far as classification goes, depressed mood most of the time, that's really signaling that serotonin is the one on the fritz. Either not enough, reuptake is happening too quickly, which is what SSRIs do. Earlier, and I mean their current class group of drugs called MAOIs, monoamine oxidase inhibitors. So that has to do with oxidase. Monoamine oxidase is a enzyme, and so it breaks down neurotransmitters. And so if you inhibit that action, then you're left with the same amount of serotonin, or an increased amount of serotonin, is what I should say. Food diet, I believe what you're asking about food is that can diet contribute, and I would say there are probable connections with food, but that's so many layers that I'm not gonna that I don't actually know, and I'm not gonna go jump into. But it's an interesting thing, and diet can be implicated. Meredith asking again, does seasonal depression? Okay, yeah. So seasonal affective disorder, SAD. Major or minor depression. I believe it. Well, the symptoms themselves are the basis for severity. So, even though this particular thing is called major depressive disorder, it's because they wanted to use the name to break it apart from other things, right? And so it depends on the symptoms and how severe they are as whether or not it's major or minor. And so I would say yes, it depends on the person. Seasonal depression, seasonal affective disorder can be a struggle. I would say it's closer to cyclothymia because of its cyclical nature. And most folks who have seasonal affective disorder tend to have mild symptoms of it, but it's still sucky. One promising treatment for that, and one of the reasons that seasonal affective disorder happens is being inside and not being exposed to the sun as much because it's cold and there's not as much sun, right? So one of the ways that you can help that is through lightbox therapy. So you just shine a light that mimics sunlight. And Psychi and the Psych Social Club, with the help of Student Senate, got a couple of light boxes that you can borrow in the library. Whenever we get back to campus, those are available. You just go to the reference desk and ask for a light box, and you can go shine it in your face while you work or something like that, and it's supposed to help. Christine, Dad had a major injury at work years ago and lost everything. He is now on depression meds, okay, but depression also runs in his family. I'm just not sure if his depression was caused by his injury or because it runs in his family. It's probably both, Christine, and the injury was an instigating factor, right? So, Meredith's asking, what about endorphins? I assume that you're asking as far as like how do endorphins make you feel. Endorphins are endogenous opioids. They're opioids that our body makes. So in the same way that you would take an opioid, right? Like morphine or heroin or fentanyl or something like that. So those are what our endorphins are. Okay, so so they're endogenous opioids. Endogenous means that they come from within, so they're created within, so we make them, and they are ways in which our body protects our pain perception. So endorphins are released when tissue is damaged. So the reason why you have a runner's high is because you ran on your body and your knees took a lot of impact, a bunch. So your body releases endorphins to prevent those pain signals from overwhelming your brain. So they make us feel good because they're pain relief. They're what we do to create pain relief. So endorphins are released when you are under physical trauma. So as far as it relating to depression, it might make you feel momentarily good, but unless you're hurting yourself constantly, so like doing self-harming behavior, they're not much of a factor. Some people do self-harm in depression because of it releasing endorphins. Any other questions before we move on to bipolar disorder? Bipolar disorder, you might have some questions with bipolar disorder. So go ahead and ask them. I'm going to move on to bipolar disorder just to keep us moving here. As any other questions come in, please do keep asking them. These are great. I like doing this. Okay, so bipolar disorder is another common kind of depressive disorder. It used to be called manic depressive disorder. I think from the DSM-IV previously, and then in the DSM-IV text revision, it was renamed to bipolar disorder, and then so bipolar disorder then carried through to DSM-V. I'm pretty sure that's how the history works on that. And so this is a cyclic disorder of depressive episodes intermixed with manic episodes. Okay, and so most of the description of major depressive disorder carries through to bipolar disorder for the depressive episodes, and then mania is a hyperactive, wildly optimistic state in which poor judgment is usually common. So less inhibition, more impulsivity. Okay, very hyperactive. Lots of people who have untreated bipolar disorder in their manic states will like stay awake for days on end. Okay. There is some evidence that mild mania fuels creativity, which makes intuitive sense. And then there are some folks out there, I don't know what to call them. There are folks out there who believe that some of the greatest like artists, sculptures, kings, queens, whatever, were bipolar because they were so creative. And one of the major ones that have been like thrown into this mix is Leonardo da Vinci, because apparently he would draw, sketch, paint, sculpt in spurts, fits in spurts. And so, there are the historical clinicians, we'll call them, who are like, well, yeah, this all points to Leonardo da Vinci having bipolar disorder, even though bipolar disorder wasn't identified then. I mean, the symptoms still could have existed, right? But it's interesting but weird to ask these questions because I don't know what the point is. You cannot go back in time and ask him, nor are you gonna get any clarity from his body, you know, his rotting corpse, if there even is one still. His text, I mean, if they haven't found it yet, then you're probably not going to find it. His medical records, you're not going to do that. Hey dude, what are you doing? You want to come say hi to my stream and get wished a happy birthday? No? Alright, cool, man. You do you, dude. You do you. He's trying to get a, sparkling water. Hey, one of my students said happy birthday, bud.
Thank you, everybody. Hi.
Come in.
I'm 6 today.
Mm-hmm. You are 6 today. And a pro to opening your own cans. Look at that. Clickety clack. Oh, you gotta suck the stuff off the top. Not lick, suck. See, they're all saying happy birthday to you. So what do you say?
Thank you, everybody.
Ah, good times. Some smiles in this dour set of circumstances, this chat we're having today. He's 6, Tavian. Show them on your fingers. Here, let me hold that for you. Show them on your fingers. Yep, that's how big you are. You are 6.
Thank you, Daddy.
See you later, dude. Thanks, everyone. That's sweet of you. Alright. Okie dokie. You'll be able to drive next year. Yeah, in Illinois. He's massive. I'm sure he will be able to drive. Alright. Where was I? Oh yes, mild. So if you ever come across the chats about, you know, historical figures having bipolar disorder because of like behaving in fits and spurts and creating in fits and spurts, it's probably, you just tune it out. It's, in my opinion, it's kind of dumb. Okay, it's kind of dumb. So treating bipolar disorder is not the same as treating speculative history. Yeah, it's not the same as treating major depressive disorder because of reasons. Chemical imbalances are not actually the same for bipolar disorder as they are for major depressive disorder. Bipolar disorder is more heritable than major depressive disorder. So just I think it's smidge more. I think I have it on this graph on the next slide. And what you want to do with bipolar disorder is treat the person to an even keel, right? So with depression, you're sort of trying to lift them up, right? But with bipolar, you want to keep that person even, okay? You want to keep their mood imbalance even. And so while you might treat depression with an SSRI, a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, or an MAOI, a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, or ketamine, which has been recently approved in highly controlled settings. Get yourself some special K. So ketamine. Also, psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms, shrooms, has also been limitedly approved for treatment of depression, right? Because you're trying to just bring people up. The treatment for bipolar disorder, generally speaking, is with lithium. Lithium, the actual metal, lithium. I guess I'll call it a salt. The alkaline metal. Just like sodium, lithium has some properties to it that assist with maintaining an even mood in a bipolar patient. So that's lithium. There are also synthetic drugs out there, but lithium seems to be the stalwart. I believe, though, that lithium has a lot of unnice side effects. I'm not entirely sure. Elena says that parent with bipolar... Oh, okay. He has never been medically diagnosed, but shows the symptoms. Wow, that's rough. If you can convince him to get to a doctor to be diagnosed, I think that would be really helpful to you and your family. That's from my opinion, not telling you what to do, but I think that would be use. Would a zombie considered having an even mood? I don't know. It depends on what zombies you're talking about. Like the zombies from like 28 Days Later, definitely not, because they're super ragey, right? The Walking Dead zombies, I don't know. They seem kind of ragey sometimes. I don't know. It depends. The World War Z zombies are also super ragey. They like climb other zombies like frickin' termites. So strange. So I'm gonna go with a no. Maybe the Shaun of the Dead ones, which are more like the George Romero, like kind of zombies. I'm gonna go with that. Answer. It's a good question. Asking about my film prowess here. All right. So let's understand some depressive disorder stuff. Let's talk about the psychology of it all, and I think we'll call that a day. So, any good theory of depression should explain the following phenomena. Okay, so these 6 phenomena are observable, and we need to be able to describe them if we're going to come up with an overarching theory of depression. So far, we don't have an overarching theory of depression. The closest one I think is the Aaron Beck's theory of depression. But I don't know if it does all 6 of these. So the first one is behaviors and thoughts change with depression, and so we're actually going to go over that in on the next slide. So I'm gonna leave that for the next slide. But I will say that nearly half of people diagnosed with major depressive disorder do display symptoms of another disorder, and generally speaking, those comorbid disorders are anxiety or substance abuse. Okay, depression is widespread. It is worldwide. Okay, so is this a human universal? That needs to be determined. And so if it is a human universal, then the causes of depression also need to be human universals, right? Risk in women is nearly double that of men. Okay, so women experience depression 1.7 times more often than men. That's from the CDC in 2014. I would imagine that figure hasn't changed much even in the last 6 years. Women's disorders are generally more internal, okay, thus having depression more often. and being diagnosed with this more often, because women also use health services more often than men do. And so men's disorders tend to be more externally based. So alcohol use disorder, antisocial behavior, lack of impulse control, that sort of thing. So if you compare women and men in that way, you can see a dichotomy with the source of these issues. Most major depressive episodes end on their own. Okay, so again, this goes back to Meredith's question: do they go away? Therapy often helps to speed recovery, but without therapy, most people do recover. But again, the symptoms here is what we're talking about. So the symptoms for recovery need to be mild as opposed to severe. Okay, severe people may not recover, and it may require maintenance. Okay, recovery does end up being more likely if the first depressive episode in that person's life is later in their lives. So older men and women, so we're talking early middle age to elderly, these depressive episodes will last for shorter amounts of time and will clear up on their own. So no medication, no therapy needed than somebody who suffers from depression earlier in their lives. So as a middle childhood, in their middle childhood, teenage years, early adulthood, and up and through their 30s. Okay. Stressful events usually precede depression, so this then speaks to Christine's question, right? So about 1 in 4 people diagnosed with major depressive disorder have experienced some form of emotional, financial, and or professional trauma within the past month, right? So this is a time-based disorder, so 2 or more weeks, and so you can, most of the time, then just think about in the past month what major trauma has happened to this new person. People who move to a new culture will also experience depression more often than people who are from that culture, of course, because culture shock is a real thing. Okay, it even happens in the United States. People move around the United States and find that other cultures are different from their own and have depressive episodes following that move. And then the last thing, depression appears to afflict new generations earlier. This is really incredible in a sad sense, of course. It's incredible because with each new generation, depression strikes earlier. And so now what we're seeing in my generation and your generation, and even any sort of generation that exists after you, that it's likely we're seeing depression appear in people's teenage years. And the highest rates of young adults with depression are in developed countries. Okay, and so if you do cross-generational studies and see that, okay, we have high rates of teenage years in Gen Z and millennials, then let's compare them to Gen Xers. Let's compare them to boomers. Let's compare them to the greatest generation. Let's compare them to the silent generation, right? Those are all of the 20th century generations. In North America, so we're pretty much talking about US and Canada, even though Mexico's a part of North America, it's not included in this statistic. Young adults are 3 times more likely than their grandparents to suffer, recently or ever, from depression. So this statistic is generally focused on Gen Z. Most of you who are in this chat right now, right? Younger than me. That's you. So your grandparents are likely baby boomers. Okay. This is interesting because one of the issues with cross-generational studies is one of the hidden validity issues is that we actually don't know if people had depression and they just never went and got diagnosed. It's entirely possible that rates have always been the same in teenagers, for hundreds of years, but because there's such a stigma toward mental disorders and psychological disorders that people weren't getting tested, they weren't talking about it, and we ultimately needed a culture shift, just a broad culture shift in Western culture, to start investigating these things and knowing more about them, and that would lead people to go and get tested, go and get diagnosed, start talking about it openly, and so that's why we're seeing higher rates. So there is some generational effect, right? You are more willing to talk openly about it than your parents, grandparents, great-grandparents will or should talk about it, right? So you're just more open about it because it's a real thing as opposed to other people. And then there are some other cultural things that do need to be included in this discussion. So from a perspective of Latino cultures, okay, specifically Latin America, so Mexico southward, right? There's this idea of machismo, okay, and that men shouldn't have these quote-unquote weaknesses, right? So there's that cultural layer to it as well. Not necessarily generational, but also cultural, right? Genes do play a role in, and this again speaks to Christine's question, as well as Elena's question about genes. So you can see here that generalized anxiety disorder is about 30% heritable. Okay, and so what does that mean? Well, you can see here if you turn your head, you can see that heritability estimates percent of variation due to genetic influence. Right, so lower numbers mean less heritable, bigger numbers mean more heritable. Okay, and so here I have bipolar, schizophrenia, anorexia, major depressive disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder, because the R got cut off. I think my crop went a little bit too far on that one. But in any case, here we have generalized anxiety disorder, so GAD is less than 30%. And then major depressive disorder is less than 40%. So the genetic component for MDD is less. And then but you can see here that bipolar disorder is 85% heritable. So what does that mean? Well, it means that you are more likely to have bipolar disorder if you have at least one parent with bipolar disorder. And you can see that that's very similar to schizophrenia as well. Schizophrenia has a strong genetic basis, that as we'll talk about I think next time. I don't think we're going to get into depressive disorder or psychotic disorders today. Now that I see the time and what it is. In any case, let's finish up. And again, if you have any questions about any of the stuff that we're talking about, please feel free to drop it in here. All right. Additional biological factors include your brain. So again, serotonin tends to be scarce/inactive. One of the things that helps is taking an SSRI. Norepinephrine I forgot to ask this. I think Golden Duke asked this question. Norepinephrine actually is a neurotransmitter that is implicated. It seems to be scarce during depression. And if we talk about bipolar at the same time, it tends to be overabundant during manic episodes. Okay. Overall, brain activity slows during depression and increases during mania. So there's like this ebb and flow in bipolar disorder. An interesting thing that helps people. Right, so we talked about SSRIs already, so serotonin, increasing serotonin supplies. But another thing that you can do is to increase your serotonin production is repetitive physical exercise. So exercise is a good treatment option for somebody who's not willing to take medication or doesn't want to take medication because of the side effects, that they can engage in exercise to increase serotonin and hopefully thus decreasing depression. But it's not the only feature, right? It's not the only feature because this is the biopsychosocial model. Yeah, we've talked about the biological factors, but we also need to talk about, other things like the social cognitive factors. Nutrition, again, that one I want to sort of step away from because the jury isn't out on it yet. There is some link between depression and heart-healthy diets, which if you have a heart-healthy diet, so taking, veggies, fish, olive oil, this is going to lower your risk of depression, but it also obviously lowers your risk of heart disease too. So there's a confound there. Increased alcohol use can increase depression because alcohol is a depressant, which depresses your mood, and that's one of the main things, right? So yeah. Social cognitive factors. So I want to bring up this flow chart. Okay, so a couple of things about your cognition that leads to that is features or leads to depression. Features of or leads to depression. So self-defeating beliefs, right? So this is, saying to yourself that I am not a good person, I'm worthless, I suck. Self-defeating. These are all facets of learned helplessness. Okay? Again, negative explanatory style. That is, seeing the world through a negative lens. Pessimism. Okay? Also contributes. And then rumination. Compulsive fretting. Overthinking about our problems and their causes. Okay? This increases negative moods. This diverts us from thinking about other tasks in our lives. Right? So, let's talk about this breakup with romantic partner. With this very powerful music. So, it doesn't really fit, though. Let's see if I can... Let's change that. There we go. So, on this blue side are a trio of thoughts that would lead to depression. And on this purple side are the opposite trio of thoughts that represent successful coping, right? So you break up with your romantic partner. You can either have a stable belief about it, or you can have a temporary belief about it. So stable would be, I'll never get over this, right? So that's a stable belief. I'll never get over this breakup. Whereas temporary belief about the breakup is, this is hard to take, but I will get through this, right? So we have stable or temporary beliefs about the event. We can also think about the event either globally or specifically. Globally is, without my partner, I can't seem to do anything right. But the opposite of that would be a specific belief about the person. I miss my partner, but thankfully I have family and other friends, right? So a belief that suggests, right, these are more pessimistic and self-defeating. These are more optimistic and helpful, right? I miss my partner, but thankfully I have family and other friends. That's a good support network, right? Then finally, how you internalize it. Is it an internal belief or is it an external belief? Internal is I place all the blame on me. That's self-defeating and self-blaming, right? Our breakup was all my fault. External would be, you know, it takes two to make a relationship work and it wasn't meant to be, right? So if you have stable, global, and internal beliefs, these are generally speaking more negative and pessimistic, a negative explanatory style, stable, global, and internal, versus a more successful coping strategy of temporary beliefs, specific, and external, okay? The cause was external versus internal, okay? And then the last thing is depression's vicious cycle of cognition, of negative cognition, of just a self-defeating loop of negative cognitions, right? So depression, generally speaking, as we've just discussed, right, with the theory of depression, needs to include stressful events are interpreted, okay? Step 2, they're interpreted by a brooding, native, explanatory style. So, you know, you feel bad about it, you're pessimistic about it, and so those stressful events are viewed through that lens. That creates a hopeless, depressed state. This tends to drag you down into that depressed mood, reduces the pleasure that you've gotten from other things, and kind of sends you spiraling down to the last step, which hampers the way the person thinks and acts. So depression essentially changes your cognitions into this negative spiral, okay? And so when that happens, you go back up to 1, because then something else stressful happens that gets viewed through the brooding negative explanatory style lens that then creates a further hopeless, depressed state, which then further changes the way the person thinks and acts. And then another stressful event happens, and this whole thing continues again. And it goes over and over and over and over again. And that is how untreated depression, that's what untreated depression looks like. And that's why that last point of MDD that I wanted the last symptom of repetitive thoughts about harm and suicide, or death and suicide, are after this cycle has continued and continued and continued. And so therapy intends to break up this cycle by asking if we can change the way you think about the world, okay? How we interpret stressful events. These are tools for an important toolbox. From a cognitive behavioral standpoint, these are important tools from a toolbox that breaks up number 4. If we can change the way 1 and 2 work, then number 4 doesn't happen. Number 4 doesn't fuel a new 1 through 4, and so on and so forth. So that's what therapy does for depression, is break up this cognitive cycle, which is vicious and terrible and spirals people downward, and so on and so forth. So that's all I have for you today. Sorry to end on such a dour note. My goodness, it's such a bummer. Such a bummer. But if you have any questions,